The screaming started at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was checking my watch when the first shot rang out across Riverside Park during Cedar Rapids' annual summer festival. The sound cut through the laughter of children, the melody of carnival music, and the chatter of thousands of families enjoying what should have been a perfect Iowa afternoon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Zoe Valdez, and I'm a 29-year-old Army sniper who had just returned home after 15 months in Afghanistan. But in that moment, as chaos erupted around me and people started running in every direction, I wasn't thinking about my military training or my service record. I was thinking about my sister Brooke, who was somewhere in that crowd, and how just 3 hours earlier she had rolled her eyes at me and said those words that still echoed in my ears. "Oh please Zoe, your deployment was basically a vacation. You got to travel the world while the rest of us worked real jobs." She had no idea that in less than 4 hours that vacation training would be the only thing standing between her and a bullet. The festival had been packed wall to wall with families, teenagers, and vendors selling everything from corn dogs to handmade jewelry. The kind of wholesome Midwestern gathering, where the biggest worry was usually whether you'd eaten too much funnel cake. But now, as I watched people scatter like leaves in a windstorm, I could see the stark reality of what was happening. Someone with a rifle had positioned themselves somewhere high, somewhere with a clear view of the main festival grounds, and they were picking off target. My hands moved to my waistband instinctively, but of course, I wasn't armed. This was a family festival in Cedar Rapids, not a combat zone in Kandahar province. Yet my body responded exactly the way it had been trained to respond during those long months overseas. Time slowed, my breathing steadied, my eyes began scanning for elevated positions, escape routes, and most importantly, the source of the gunfire. That's when I saw her. Brooke was crouched behind an overturned picnic table about 60 yards away, her designer sundress torn at the shoulder, her perfectly styled blonde hair now messy and streaked with dirt. She was trapped. Between her and safety stood an open field that the shooter had a clear line of sight on. Every time someone tried to run across that space, another shot echoed through the air. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Brooke had treated my military service like an inconvenience, something I did to get attention or avoid real responsibility. She had never understood why I chose the Army over joining the family restaurant business. She couldn't comprehend why I would voluntarily deploy to dangerous places when I could have stayed home and lived a comfortable, predictable life in Iowa. And now, with her pressed against that table, phone clutched in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face, all of that training she had dismissed as a vacation hobby was about to become the most important thing in both our lives. The Valdez family dinner table had always been a battlefield of a different sort. Every Sunday evening, we gathered in the dining room of our sprawling house on Maple Street, the same house where 3 generations of Valdez had built their version of the American dream. The walls were lined with photographs of our family restaurant empire, newspaper clippings, celebrating business milestones, and awards recognizing my parents' contributions to the Cedar Rapids community, but there were no pictures of me in uniform, no mention of my service commendation, no acknowledgement of the life I had chosen outside the family orbit. I still remember the last family dinner before my deployment, sitting in that familiar chair while my parents fawned over Brooke's latest promotion to senior marketing executive at a tech startup in Des Moines. She had just signed a major client, some corporation that wanted to rebrand their image, and the conversation revolved entirely around her success, her future, her brilliant career trajectory. My mother, Diana, passed around her phone showing photos from Brooke's company party. My father, Robert, raised his wine glass in a toast to his youngest daughter's achievements. And I sat there, picking at my grandmother's famous enchiladas, waiting for someone to ask about my upcoming deployment. They never did. When I finally mentioned that I would be leaving for Afghanistan in 2 weeks, the response was predictably lukewarm. My mother sighed and said something about hoping I would be safe. My father nodded and changed the subject back to the restaurant's quarterly earnings. But it was Brooke who delivered the line that cut deepest. "Honestly, Zoe, I don't understand why you keep doing this to yourself," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "It's like you're addicted to running away from real life. The rest of us have to stay here and deal with actual responsibilities. Real life, actual responsibilities. As if serving my country, as if putting my life on the line for something bigger than myself, as if mastering skills that most people couldn't even imagine, somehow didn't count as real." I had tried to explain it to them before, tried to help them understand what military service meant to me, but every conversation ended the same way, with them looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language, like I was the family member who had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and refused to find her way back to the path they had laid out for me. The truth was, I had always been different. Even as a child, I was drawn to challenges that scared other kids. While Brooke was playing dress-up and hosting tea parties, I was climbing trees, building forts, and teaching myself to shoot with a BB gun in the backyard. When other girls my age were focused on makeup and boys, I was reading military history and watching documentaries about special forces operations. My parents had hoped it was a phase. They had assumed that eventually I would outgrow my fascination with all things military and settle into the role they had envisioned for me, working alongside Brooke to expand the family business, marrying someone local, raising children who would carry on the Valdez name. But I had different dreams, dreams that took me far beyond the borders of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, dreams that required a different kind of strength, a different kind of courage, a different kind of commitment than anything my family understood. When I enlisted at 18, the disappointment in their eyes was unmistakable. When I excelled in basic training and qualified for advanced marksmanship programs, they responded with polite congratulations that felt more like condolences. And when I volunteered for my first deployment, they acted as if I had announced I was joining a circus. Over the years, I had learned to compartmentalize their lack of understanding. I built a life within the military that gave me the recognition, respect, and sense of purpose that I couldn't find at home. My fellow soldiers understood what drove me. My superiors saw my potential and pushed me to reach. My training instructors recognized my natural talent for precision shooting and helped me develop it into something extraordinary. But coming home was always hard. Coming home meant stepping back into a world where my achievements were invisible, where my skills were irrelevant, where my identity as a soldier meant nothing compared to my identity as the daughter who had chosen wrong. The 15 months in Afghanistan had been transformative in ways I was still processing. I had served as part of an elite sniper team, conducting reconnaissance missions, in providing overwatch for infantry units, operating in some of the most dangerous terrain in the world. I had made shots that saved lives, gathered intelligence that prevented attacks, and earned the respect of some of the most skilled soldiers in the U.S. Army. But none of that mattered when I walked back into the Valdez family orbit. To them I was still just Zoe, the stubborn daughter who refused to grow up and accept her responsibilities, the one who kept choosing adventure over stability, danger over safety, uncertainty over the comfortable predictability of life in Cedar Rapids. Brooke had made her feelings about my service crystal clear over the years through a steady stream of dismissive comments and casual cruelty. She called my deployments extended camping trips. She referred to my military training as playing soldier, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me that while I was gallivanting around the world, she was building a real career, making real money, and contributing to the family legacy. The morning of the festival, she had outdone herself. We were getting ready to leave for Riverside Park when she looked at me with that familiar expression of superior amusement and delivered her verdict on my military service with surgical precision. "You know, Zoe, I've been thinking about it and I really don't understand why you act like your deployment was such a big deal. You basically got a paid vacation to see the world while the rest of us stayed here and worked real jobs. I mean, how hard could it have been? You got free meals, free housing, and all you had to do was follow orders. Sounds pretty cushy to me." I had felt the familiar sting of her words, the casual dismissal of everything I had sacrificed and accomplished. But I had learned long ago not to engage with Brooke when she was in one of her moods. Arguing with her only gave her more ammunition, more opportunities to twist my words and make me feel small. So I had simply nodded, grabbed my keys, and said I would meet them at the festival. I needed some time alone, some space to breathe, before spending the afternoon pretending that everything was fine between us. But as I drove through the familiar streets of Cedar Rapids that morning, Brooke's words echoed in my mind. A vacation. She thought 15 months in a combat zone, 15 months of hypervigilance, in life or death decisions, 15 months of missing home while serving something bigger than myself, had been a vacation. She had no idea what she was talking about. She had no idea what it felt like to go days without sleep, scanning horizons for threats that could appear at any moment. She had no idea what it felt like to hold your breath while lining up a shot that could mean the difference between your team making it home safely or not making it home at all. She had no idea what it felt like to carry the weight of that responsibility, that precision, that constant awareness that every decision you made could have life or death consequences. But most of all, she had no idea that in just a few hours, all of that training she had so casually dismissed would become the most important thing in her world. As I parked my car near the festival entrance that afternoon, I could hear the sounds of celebration drifting across the park. Families laughing, children playing, vendors calling out their wares. It was the kind of scene that should have filled me with peace, with gratitude for being home, with appreciation for the simple pleasure of living in a place where festivals could happen without fear. Instead, I felt the familiar weight of isolation that came with being a soldier in a civilian world. The knowledge that my experiences had changed me in ways that the people I loved most would never understand. The understanding that no matter how much I wanted to belong here, part of me would always be scanning for threats, assessing distances, calculating angles. I had no way of knowing that in less than 3 hours, those instincts would stop being a burden and start being a lifeline. I had no way of knowing that everything Brooke had said about my service, about my training, about my choice to put my life on the line for something bigger than myself, was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The festival was in full swing when the shooting started, and in that moment of chaos and terror, when people were running and screaming and desperately seeking safety, there was only one person in that entire crowd who had the training, the skills and the experience to do what needed to be done. And that person was the sister who had supposedly spent the last 15 months on vacation. The morning I left for Afghanistan, my duffel bag felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the gear inside, but because of the weight of everything I was leaving behind. The silence in the house that morning was deafening.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My parents had already left for the restaurant, citing an early morning delivery that couldn't wait. Brooke had texted that she had an important client call and couldn't make it to see me. I stood alone in the kitchen where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years, looking at the empty chairs around the table, and realized that this was probably exactly how they wanted it. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic farewells, just a quiet exit that wouldn't disrupt their carefully ordered lives. The bus to the airport was nearly empty at 5 in the morning. I watched Cedar Rapids disappear through the window, the familiar landmarks becoming smaller and smaller until they were just memories. The Valdez restaurant sign on 5th Avenue, where my great-grandfather had started with a single food cart. The high school where I had been an outsider even among my classmates. The neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone, where your family name defined you before you ever had a chance to define yourself. I was leaving all of that behind for something I couldn't fully explain to anyone, least of all myself. The Army recruiter had talked about service, about honor, about opportunities to travel and learn skills that would last a lifetime. But what had really drawn me was something deeper, something that felt like destiny pulling me toward a purpose I couldn't yet see. Basic training at Fort Benning was everything I had expected and nothing I was prepared for. The physical demands pushed my body past limits I didn't know existed. The mental challenges forced me to think faster, react quicker, and trust my instincts in ways that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. But it was the moment I first held a sniper rifle that everything clicked into place. Staff Sergeant Riley Chen was the kind of instructor who could spot potential from across a firing range. She watched me line up my first shot at 200 yards, noted how naturally my breathing settled, how instinctively my body found the proper position, how my eyes focused on the target with an intensity that surprised even me. "Valdez," she called after I had put 5 consecutive rounds through the center ring. "You ever done this before?" I shook my head, still looking through the scope, still marveling at how right it felt to have that precision instrument in my hands. "Well, you're doing it now," she said, "and you're going to keep doing it until you're the best damn marksman this unit has ever seen." The next 18 months were a blur of advanced training, specialized courses, and evaluations that would determine whether I had what it took to join an elite sniper team. I learned to calculate wind speed and elevation adjustments in my head. I practiced holding my breath for minutes at a time. I memorized the ballistic properties of different ammunition types. I studied terrain analysis, camouflage techniques, and advanced reconnaissance methods. But most importantly, I learned to trust myself, to trust my eyes, my hands, my judgment, to trust that when everything was on the line, when lives depended on making an impossible shot under impossible circumstances, I could deliver. My family never asked about any of it. When I called home during training, they listened politely to my updates and then quickly changed the subject to restaurant business or Brooke's latest achievement. When I sent photos of my graduation from sniper school, the response was a brief text from my mother saying she was proud but worried about me. Worried about me, as if learning to protect people, as if developing skills that could save lives, as if dedicating myself to something that required absolute precision, an unwavering commitment, was somehow dangerous rather than noble. The deployment to Afghanistan came 8 months later. I remember the weight of my gear as I boarded the transport plane, the nervous energy of the other soldiers around me, the mixture of excitement and fear that comes with heading into the unknown. But I also remember feeling more ready for something than I had ever felt in my life. Kandahar province was nothing like Iowa, The landscape was harsh, unforgiving, painted in shades of brown and gray that seemed to stretch endlessly toward mountains that rose like ancient sentinels against the sky. The heat was oppressive during the day, the cold brutal at night, and everywhere always was the awareness that danger could appear from any direction at any moment. Our forward operating base was a collection of temporary structures surrounded by walls and razor wire, a small island of American military presence in a sea of uncertainty. The living conditions were Spartan. We slept in cramped quarters, ate meals that came from packages, and showered when water was available. It was nothing like the comfortable, predictable life I had left behind in Cedar Rapids. It was exactly where I belonged. My sniper team consisted of 4 specialists, each with their own area of expertise. Corporal Kai Washington was our spotter, a soft-spoken soldier from Detroit, who could read terrain like a topographical map and calculate atmospheric conditions faster than any computer. Sergeant Torres handled communications and coordination with ground units. Private First Class Murphy was our reconnaissance expert, capable of moving through hostile territory like a ghost. And I was the shooter, the one who made the shots that mattered when everything else had failed. Our missions varied, but they all required the same fundamental skills: patience, precision, and the ability to remain calm under pressure that would break most people. We provided overwatch for infantry patrols moving through dangerous areas. We gathered intelligence on enemy positions and movements. We eliminated high-value targets when diplomatic and conventional military options were exhausted. Each mission was different, but they all followed the same pattern: hours of preparation, reviewing maps and intelligence report; hours of movement, getting into position without being detected; hours of waiting, watching, calculating, and then sometimes a single moment when everything came down to one shot, one breath, one squeeze of the trigger. I made my first combat shot 3 weeks into the deployment. An enemy sniper had pinned down a patrol of American soldiers, wounding 2 and preventing medical evacuation. From our position 800 yards away, I could see the muzzle flash from his rifle, could calculate his position based on the angle of fire, could estimate the adjustments needed for wind and elevation. Kai called out the environmental factors in a steady voice. Wind 2 to 3 knots from the southeast. Temperature 87 degrees. Target is stationary behind the concrete barrier, approximately 820 yards. I settled into position, feeling my heartbeat slow, my breathing become controlled and rhythmic. Through the scope I could see the edge of the enemy sniper's position, the small gap where he would appear when he lined up his next shot. The waiting was always the hardest part, not knowing when the target would present itself, not knowing if you would have a clear shot when the moment came, not knowing if the calculations you had made would prove accurate when everything was on the line. And then he appeared, just the edge of his shoulder and the side of his head, visible for maybe 3 seconds as he adjusted his position. In that instant, everything I had learned, everything I had practiced, everything I had prepared for came together in a single fluid motion. The shot felt perfect the moment it left the rifle. The recoil, the sound, the way the scope settled back on target. And through the lens, I watched the enemy sniper slump forward, his weapon falling silent. Target down, Kai confirmed, his voice matter-of-fact. Patrol is moving to secure the area. That was it. No celebration, no congratulations. Just the quiet satisfaction of a job done well and lives saved. Within minutes, we were packing our gear and moving to the next position, already focused on the next mission. Over the next 15 months, there would be dozens of similar moments, some easier, some more challenging, all carrying the same weight of responsibility and the same requirement for absolute precision. I made shots at distances that pushed the limits of what was possible. I adapted to environmental conditions that would have made training scenarios seem simple. I learned to trust my instincts in ways that went beyond anything I had been taught. But more than that, I learned who I was, not who my family expected me to be, not who Cedar Rapids society thought I should become, but who I actually was when everything else was stripped away. I was someone who could remain calm when others panicked, someone who could make life or death decisions without hesitation, someone who could carry the weight of responsibility that comes with holding other people's lives in your hands. The team became my family in ways that my actual family had never been. Kai, Torres, and Murphy understood me without explanation. They had seen me under pressure and knew what I was capable of. They trusted me with their lives, and I trusted them with mine. We shared experiences that bonded us in ways that civilian relationships could never match. When Kai took shrapnel from an improvised explosive device during our 8th month in country, I sat by his hospital bed for 3 days straight. When Torres received word that his father had died back home, we held an impromptu memorial service in our quarter. When Murphy struggled with nightmares after a particularly difficult mission, We took turns staying awake with him until he could sleep peacefully again. This was what family looked like. This was what loyalty meant. This was what it felt like to be valued for who you were rather than judged for who you weren't. Meanwhile, communication with my actual family dwindled to almost nothing. I sent emails that went unanswered. I called when satellite connections were available and found myself talking to voicemail systems. I mailed postcards from different regions of Afghanistan and never received responses. The few times I did manage to connect with them, the conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. They asked generic questions about my safety and gave generic updates about restaurant business and local news. Brooke occasionally got on the phone to tell me about her latest promotion or business trip, making her life sound glamorous and important in ways that highlighted how little she understood about what I was doing. I just got back from a client conference in Denver, she would say. The hotel was amazing, and the networking opportunities were incredible. I'm learning so much about international marketing strategy. And I would sit there in a dusty outpost thousands of miles from home, having spent the previous week providing overwatch for a humanitarian mission that delivered medical supplies to remote villages, and wonder how to bridge the gap between her world and mine. The truth was, I had stopped trying. The distance wasn't just geographical anymore. It was fundamental, philosophical, existential. We were living in completely different universes, operating by completely different sets of values, measuring success by completely different standards. She valued comfort, security, recognition, and material achievement. I valued service, sacrifice, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of doing something that mattered even if no one back home would ever understand what it was. By the time my deployment was nearing its end, I had been promoted twice, earned several commendations, and gained a reputation within the sniper community as someone who could make impossible shots under impossible circumstances. My superiors had started talking about advanced training opportunities, leadership positions, and the possibility of joining even more elite units. But none of that meant anything to the people I had left behind in Cedar Rapids. To them I was still just Zoe, the daughter who had chosen wrong, the sister who refused to grow up and accept her responsibilities. The flight home felt longer than the flight to Afghanistan had. I stared out the window as America appeared below me, green and peaceful and familiar, and wondered how I was going to readjust to a world where the biggest crisis was a restaurant running out of a popular menu item. My parents picked me up from the airport, and the ride home was filled with the same polite small talk that had characterized most of our communications over the previous 15 months. They asked about the flight, commented on how good I looked, mentioned that Brooke was excited to see me, but they didn't ask about the missions. They didn't ask about the shots I had made or the lives I had saved. They didn't ask about the friends I had made or the experiences that had changed me.
They talked about the weather, about traffic, about plans for dinner, as if I had been away at summer camp rather than serving in a combat zone. When we pulled into the driveway of the house on Maple Street, everything looked exactly the same. Same landscaping, same front porch, same American flag hanging from the same pole. But I felt like a completely different person walking through that door. Brooke was waiting in the living room, looking polished and professional in a way that reminded me how different our paths had become. She hugged me briefly and immediately started talking about her latest business success, a major client acquisition that had resulted in a significant bonus and recognition from her company's executive team. "I'm basically running the entire Midwest marketing division now," she said, settling into her favorite chair with a glass of wine. "The responsibility is enormous, but the opportunities are incredible. I'm traveling constantly, making decisions that affect millions of dollars in revenue." I listened and nodded and tried to connect with the enthusiasm in her voice, but all I could think about was how small her world seemed, how narrow her definition of responsibility was, how limited her understanding of what it meant to make decisions that really mattered. That night, lying in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling that I had memorized during countless sleepless nights as a teenager, I realized that coming home was going to be harder than deploying had been. At least in Afghanistan, I had known who I was and what I was supposed to do. Here, I felt lost, displaced, like a stranger in my own life. The next few weeks passed in a haze of readjustment and frustration. I attended family dinners where no one asked about my experiences. I visited old friends who couldn't relate to what I had been through. I walked through the familiar streets of Cedar Rapids, feeling like I was moving through a world that had nothing to do with me. And through it all, Brooke continued to treat my military service like an extended vacation, making comments about how refreshed I looked and how exciting it must have been to travel so far from home. She had no idea that I woke up every morning scanning for threats that weren't there. She had no idea that loud noises made me flinch. She had no idea that I missed the clarity of purpose and the brotherhood I had found in Afghanistan more than I had ever missed anything in my life. The morning of the festival, when she delivered her final verdict on my deployment as basically a paid vacation, I realized that nothing I could say would ever help her understand what I had really been through. She had made up her mind about who I was and what my service meant, and no amount of explanation or evidence was going to change that. So I stopped trying to explain. I stopped trying to help her understand. I accepted that this was how it was going to be, that I would always be the sister who had chosen wrong, the daughter who had wasted her potential on something they couldn't comprehend. I had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, all of that would change. I had no way of knowing that everything she had dismissed about my training, about my skills, about my experience, was about to become the most important thing in both our lives. The festival was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for the family to spend time together in a relaxed, happy environment. Instead, it became the moment when the two worlds I had been trying to reconcile collided in the most dramatic way possible. And in that collision, everything Brooke thought she knew about me, about my service, about what I had been doing for the past 15 months, was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The first indication that something was wrong came at 11:23 a.m., 3 hours before the shooting started. I was standing in line at Rodriguez Coffee, a local shop near the festival entrance, when my phone buzzed with an unusual alert. It wasn't the standard weather warning or emergency broadcast that Cedar Rapids residents were used to receiving. This was different, more urgent. Security advisory: law enforcement agencies are investigating reports of suspicious activity in the downtown area. Citizens are advised to remain vigilant and report any unusual behavior to authorities immediately. I read the message twice, my military training automatically shifting my awareness into a higher state of alertness. In Afghanistan, messages like this usually meant intelligence had picked up chatter about potential attack. Here in Iowa, it probably meant someone had reported a suspicious package or a person acting strangely, but the wording bothered me. Security advisory, not safety notice or public information update. Security advisory suggested something more serious. The barista handed me my coffee, and I stepped outside to scan the area around the festival entrance. Everything looked normal. Families walking toward Riverside Park, carrying blankets and coolers, teenagers in groups, laughing and texting on their phones, vendors setting up booths and testing sound equipment. The kind of peaceful, predictable scene that should have been reassuring. Instead, I found myself automatically noting elevated positions, escape routes, and potential cover points. Old habits from months of conducting reconnaissance in hostile territory. I tried to shake off the hypervigilance, reminding myself that this was Cedar Rapids, not Kandahar province, but something in my gut wouldn't settle. My phone rang. Brooke's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Conversations with my sister had become increasingly strained since my return, each interaction highlighting how differently we viewed the world. "Zoe, where are you?" Her voice carried that familiar tone of impatience, as if my location was somehow inconveniencing her. "Mom wants us to meet at the main entrance in 10 minutes. She's worried we won't be able to find good spots for the opening ceremony." "I'm already here," I said, watching a group of teenagers walk past, noting nothing suspicious about their behavior. "Just grabbed coffee. I'll head over to the entrance now." "Good. And Zoe," her voice took on that condescending edge I had learned to recognize over the years. "Try to relax today, okay? I know being back from your deployment must be an adjustment, but this is supposed to be fun. Family time. You don't need to be so intense about everything." I felt the familiar sting of her casual dismissal. That was her new favorite word for describing my behavior since returning home. As if being aware of my surroundings, as if maintaining situational awareness, as if carrying myself with the discipline and focus that had kept me alive in Afghanistan was somehow a character flaw rather than a survival skill. "I'll see you at the entrance," I said, ending the call before she could deliver another lecture about how I needed to learn to live in the real world again. The real world. That phrase had become Brooke's go-to criticism, whenever she wanted to highlight how my military experience had supposedly disconnected me from normal life. She used it when I checked exits upon entering restaurants. She used it when I noticed people who seemed out of place in crowds. She used it whenever my behavior reminded her that I had spent the last 15 months in places where being unaware could get you killed. But as I walked toward the festival entrance, coffee in hand, that security advisory message still fresh in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that my version of the real world and hers were about to collide in ways neither of us expected. The Valdez family had gathered near the main gate, my parents looking relaxed and festive, Brooke checking her phone with the same focused intensity she brought to everything related to her career. They were discussing the schedule of events, debating which food vendors to visit first, planning their route through the various activities and attractions. Normal family conversation about a normal summer festival in a normal Iowa town. But I found myself listening with only half my attention, the other half automatically processing the sounds and movements around us. The volume of conversations, the flow of foot traffic, the positioning of security personnel. "Zoe, you're doing it again," Brooke said, following my gaze as I noted the locations of uniformed police officers scattered throughout the entrance area. "This is what I'm talking about. You're scanning everything like you're expecting an attack. It's a community festival, not a military operation." My mother looked concerned. "Sweetie, are you feeling okay? You seem on edge." I forced myself to focus on their faces, to engage with their conversation instead of constantly monitoring our environment. This was exactly what Brooke had been criticizing since my return. My inability to simply enjoy peaceful moments without treating them as potential tactical situations. "I'm fine," I said, taking a sip of coffee and trying to project the kind of relaxed casualness that seemed to come so naturally to everyone around me. "Just getting used to crowds again." My father nodded understandingly. It must be quite an adjustment, coming back from such a remote posting. I imagine Afghanistan doesn't have many festivals like this. Remote posting. That was how he had chosen to characterize my deployment. Not combat zone, not hostile territory, not 15 months of active military operations in one of the most dangerous regions in the world. Remote posting, as if I had been stationed at a quiet research facility in the mountains somewhere. Not exactly, I agreed, deciding not to explain that the closest thing to a festival I had seen in Afghanistan was a village market that had been bombed 3 times during my deployment. We entered the festival grounds together, and I tried to let myself be absorbed by the atmosphere. The Cedar Rapids Summer Festival was an annual tradition that brought together the entire community for 3 days of food, music, games, and local culture. Families spread blankets on the grass, children ran between booths selling handmade crafts, teenagers congregated around the stage where local bands would perform throughout the day. It should have been exactly the kind of peaceful, joyful environment that would help me readjust to civilian life. Instead, I found myself automatically cataloging details that had nothing to do with enjoying the festivities. The layout of the grounds, with open fields that offered little natural cover. The elevated positions around the perimeter, including a water tower, several tall buildings, and a cellular phone tower that would provide excellent vantage points for anyone with hostile intentions. The crowd density, which was already significant and would only increase as the day progressed. "Look at this turnout," my mother said, spreading a blanket on the grass near the main stage. "I think this might be the biggest attendance we've ever had." She was right. The festival grounds were packed with more people than I had ever seen at the event. Families covered every available patch of grass, vendor booths were surrounded by long lines, and the walkways between attractions were becoming congested with foot traffic. From a security perspective, it was a nightmare scenario. Too many people, too little space, too many variables to monitor effectively. But from a community perspective, it was exactly what the organizers had hoped for. A celebration that brought together thousands of residents for a shared experience of local pride and summer fun. Brooke settled onto the blanket and immediately pulled out her phone to take photos for her social media accounts. "This is perfect," she said, adjusting her position to get the best angle. "The lighting is amazing, and look at this. My followers are going to love seeing what small-town Iowa festivals look like." Small-town Iowa festivals. She said it with the kind of amused affection that people use when describing something charming but ultimately insignificant. As if the fact that thousands of people had gathered to celebrate their community together was somehow quaint rather than meaningful. I sat down beside her and tried to focus on the positive aspects of the scene. Children laughing as they chased bubbles blown by a volunteer in a clown costume. An elderly couple dancing slowly to music from the main stage. Teenagers sharing funnel cake and trying to impress each other with carnival games. But my attention kept drifting to details that had nothing to do with the wholesome family atmosphere. The security presence was minimal. A few uniformed police officers walking casual patrols, some volunteer event staff wearing bright yellow shirts, but nothing approaching the kind of comprehensive coverage that would be required if something went wrong. The elevated positions around the perimeter remained largely unmonitored. I could see the water tower clearly from our spot on the grass, and it occurred to me that someone positioned there would have a commanding view of the entire festival grounds. The cellular tower offered similar advantages, and there were several tall buildings in the downtown area that would provide excellent shooting positions for anyone with the right equipment and the wrong intentions. "Zoe, you're doing it again," Brooke said without looking up from her phone. I can practically see your brain working in tactical mode. This is exactly what I mean about needing to learn to relax. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew what she was referring to. The way you're looking at everything like you're planning some kind of military operation. Scanning the crowd, checking out those buildings, probably calculating distances and angles and whatever else they taught you to do over there. She glanced up with that familiar expression of amused superiority. It's a summer festival, Zoe, not a combat zone. She was right, of course. I was doing exactly what she described, automatically processing the environment through the lens of tactical awareness, rather than simply enjoying the experience. But what she didn't understand was that this wasn't something I could simply turn off. 15 months of living in a place where failing to notice the wrong detail could get you killed had rewired my brain in ways that didn't come with an off switch. I'm just getting used to being around this many people again, I said, which was partially true. The crowd size was overwhelming after months of living in small military units where I knew everyone by name and sight. Well, get used to it faster, she said, returning her attention to her phone. Mom and Dad are worried that you're having trouble readjusting, and honestly, I can see why. You've been back for 3 weeks, and you still act like you're expecting someone to start shooting at any moment. The irony of that statement would become apparent in less than 3 hours, but at the time it just felt like another example of how little she understood what I had been through or what I had learned. She thought hypervigilance was a character flaw rather than a survival skill. She thought situational awareness was paranoia rather than professionalism. My phone buzzed again with another alert. This time the message was more specific. Update: Cedar Rapids Police Department is investigating reports of an individual making threatening statements regarding today's festival. Attendees are advised to report any suspicious behavior immediately. Additional security measures are being implemented. I read the message twice, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest that came with confirmed threat assessment. This wasn't just someone reporting a suspicious package anymore. This was an active investigation into specific threats against the festival itself. I showed the message to my parents, who read it with concerned but not particularly alarmed expression. The kind of reaction you might have to news about a traffic accident or a weather delay. Unfortunate, but not something that would significantly impact your day. I'm sure it's nothing serious, my mother said. Probably just someone who had too much to drink last night and said something stupid. The police have to investigate everything these days. My father nodded in agreement. Cedar Rapids is one of the safest cities in Iowa. I can't remember the last time we had any kind of serious crime, let alone something that would threaten a community event like this. But Brooke's reaction was different. She looked at me with a mixture of irritation and accusation, as if the security alert was somehow confirmation of her criticisms about my attitude. See, she said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You probably read that message and immediately started thinking about worst-case scenarios and tactical responses and all that military stuff. But the reality is, it's probably nothing. Some drunk idiot making threats he has no intention of following through on. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so our parents wouldn't hear. You need to stop seeing threats everywhere, Zoe. You need to stop treating every situation like a potential combat scenario. You're not in Afghanistan anymore. You're home. You're safe. You need to learn to live like a normal person again. Normal person. There it was again. That phrase that cut deeper than she probably intended. The implication that my military service had somehow damaged me, had made me less capable of functioning in civilian society, had turned me into someone who couldn't distinguish between real dangers and imaginary ones. But as I looked around the festival grounds, noting the crowd density, the lack of adequate security coverage, the multiple elevated positions that remained unmonitored, I couldn't shake the feeling that her definition of normal and mine had diverged in ways that went far beyond simple differences of opinion. She thought normal meant assuming the best about people and situations. I had learned that normal meant being prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. She thought normal meant relaxing your guard when you felt safe. I had learned that feeling safe was often the moment when you were in the most danger. The tension between us had been building since my return, but this felt like a culmination. She wasn't just criticizing my behavior anymore. She was attacking the foundation of who I had become, dismissing the experiences that had shaped me, trivializing the skills that had kept me alive. You know what, Brooke? I said, standing up from the blanket and brushing grass off my jeans. You're absolutely right. I do see potential threats in situations like this. I do automatically assess escape routes and cover positions. I do think about worst-case scenarios and how to respond to them. She looked up at me with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to acknowledge her criticism so directly. And you know why I do those things? I continued, because for the last 15 months, My job was to keep people safe. My job was to watch for dangers that others couldn't see. My job was to be ready to respond when something went wrong. Because when something goes wrong in the places I've been, people die. But you're not there anymore, she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being patient with me. You're here, in Cedar Rapids, at a summer festival, where the biggest danger is probably getting food poisoning from a carnival hot dog. I looked at her sitting there on the blanket, phone in hand, designer sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun, completely confident in her assessment of the situation, completely certain that her worldview was the correct one, that my caution was unnecessary, that my training was irrelevant. I hope you're right, I said quietly. I really hope you're right. But even as I said it, even as I tried to let myself believe that she might be correct about the safety of our small Iowa town, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that had been building since I received that first security alert. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way the crowd was flowing, in the positioning of the limited security presence, in the dozens of details that probably meant nothing but could mean everything. My training, my experience, my instincts were all telling me that this perfect summer afternoon was about to become something very different. And in less than 3 hours, when the first shot rang out across Riverside Park, everything Brooke had said about my paranoia, about my inability to live like a normal person, about my tendency to see threats where none existed, would be proven catastrophically wrong. But by then it would be too late for explanations or apologies. By then the only thing that would matter would be whether all that training she had dismissed as unnecessary would be enough to keep us both alive. The third security alert came at 2:15 p.m., 32 minutes before the shooting started. This time the message was different, more urgent, more specific, the kind of language that made my pulse quicken and my training kick into high gear. Immediate alert. Armed individual reported in downtown Cedar Rapids area. Festival attendees should move to secure locations and await further instructions. Law enforcement is responding to the situation. I read the message 3 times, my mind automatically shifting into the tactical assessment mode that had become second nature during my deployment. Armed individual, not suspicious person or potential threat. Armed individual. That meant confirmed weapons, confirmed hostile intent, confirmed danger. Around me the festival continued in blissful ignorance. Families laughed and took photos. Children ran between carnival games clutching prizes and cotton candy.
Teenagers gathered around the main stage where a local band was setting up for their afternoon performance. The cheerful chaos of thousands of people enjoying a perfect summer day. But now I could see everything differently. The crowd density that had seemed festive 30 minutes ago now looked dangerous. Too many people, too close together, with too few exit points. The open layout of the festival grounds that had seemed welcoming now appeared vulnerable. Wide expanses of grass with no natural cover, no barriers between potential targets and potential threats. My parents were sharing a funnel cake, discussing whether to watch the upcoming band performance or visit the craft booths first. Brooke was live streaming the festival atmosphere to her social media followers, narrating the small-town charm for her audience of urban professionals who found Iowa quaint and amusing. "This is so authentic," she was saying to her phone camera, panning across the crowd, "like stepping back in time to when America was simple and innocent. You just don't see community gatherings like this in the real world anymore." The real world, there it was again, that phrase that had become her favorite way of highlighting how disconnected she thought I had become. But as I watched her broadcast our location to hundreds of strangers on the internet, as I noted the complete lack of concern on anyone's face despite the security alerts, I wondered which one of us was really living in the real world. I pulled up the emergency contact number from the alert message and dialed. The call went straight to a busy signal. I tried again with the same result. The third attempt connected to an automated message informing callers that all operators were currently busy, and to please hold for the next available representative. That wasn't good. Emergency response systems don't get overwhelmed by routine incidents. When every phone line is busy, when automated systems are deployed to manage call volume, it means something significant is happening, something that requires all available resources and personnel. I stood up from the blanket, scanning the crowd with fresh eyes, looking for signs that other people had received similar alerts or were taking the warnings seriously. But everyone around us seemed oblivious. Conversations continued at normal volume level. Children played with the same carefree energy. Parents supervised activities with the same relaxed attention. Either they hadn't received the alerts, or they were doing exactly what Brooke had been encouraging me to do. Assuming the best, dismissing the warnings as overreactions,
trusting that nothing bad could happen in their safe, predictable community. "Where are you going?" Brooke asked, as I started walking toward the main entrance of the festival ground. "I want to see if there are any official announcements," I said. "Check with the event staff about what's happening." She looked at me with that familiar expression of exasperated patience. "Zoe, you're doing it again. You're letting those alert messages turn you into some kind of security consultant. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you about learning to relax." But I was already moving, my body automatically falling into the movement patterns I had used during reconnaissance missions in Afghanistan. Stay low, move with purpose, observe without being obvious about it. The muscle memory was still there, still sharp, still reliable. The main entrance to the festival grounds was busier than it had been earlier in the day, but not in a way that suggested emergency response. More families arriving for the afternoon activities, vendors restocking their booths, volunteers coordinating logistics for the evening event. Everything looked normal, routine, peaceful. But the police presence had changed. Instead of the casual patrol officers I had noted earlier, there were now clusters of uniformed personnel gathered in serious-looking conversations. Radio chatter was more frequent and more urgent. And most tellingly, several officers were wearing tactical gear that went far beyond standard crowd control equipment. I approached one of the volunteer coordinators, a middle-aged woman wearing the bright yellow staff shirt that identified her as event personnel. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice casual despite the growing tension in my chest. "I've been getting some security alerts on my phone. Is there anything festival attendees should be aware of?" She looked at me with the kind of practiced smile that event staff use to project calm confidence even when they're not feeling it. "Oh, those alerts. Yes, we've been getting questions about them all afternoon. The police are just being extra cautious today." Something about an individual making some inappropriate comments, but nothing that poses any real threat to the festival. "Have there been any changes to security procedures?" I asked. "Not really. Just some additional officers on duty, and we're asking people to report anything unusual. But honestly, it's probably nothing. Cedar Rapids is one of the safest communities in Iowa. We've never had any serious incidents at the festival." Never had any serious incidents. That phrase echoed in my mind as I walked back toward my family. In Afghanistan, we had learned that the phrase, "never happened before," was often followed immediately by "until today." The safest bases, the most routine missions, the most peaceful regions were often exactly where the unexpected attacks occurred. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a community where the biggest crime stories usually involved vandalism or drunk driving. A place where children played outside without supervision and doors were left unlocked at night. A place where my hypervigilance and tactical awareness were supposed to be unnecessary relics from a different world. I found my family exactly where I had left them, still enjoying their afternoon at the festival, still oblivious to the growing tension that was building beneath the surface of the cheerful community gathering. "Well," Brooke asked as I sat back down on the blanket, "did you find out that the world is ending and we all need to evacuate immediately?" "The staff says it's just precautionary," I said, not mentioning the tactical gear I had observed or the change in police radio chatter. "Someone made some threats, but they don't think it's serious." "See," she said, returning her attention to her phone. "Exactly what I told you. Some drunk idiot shooting his mouth off, and now you've spent 20 minutes in full military mode because of it. This is exactly what I mean about needing to learn to distinguish between real threats and imaginary ones." Real threats and imaginary ones. The distinction she was drawing sounded simple, obvious, logical. But my training had taught me that the difference between real and imaginary threats often became apparent only after it was too late to respond effectively. By the time a threat revealed itself as real, you were already in reaction mode instead of preparation mode. And in reaction mode, people died. I tried to focus on the band that had started performing on the main stage. Local musicians playing cover versions of popular songs for an appreciative audience of families and teenagers. The kind of wholesome entertainment that defined small-town summer festival. The lead singer was encouraging crowd participation, and hundreds of people were clapping along with the rhythm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. Not something dramatic or obvious, but something subtle and dangerous. The kind of threat that revealed itself gradually, through small changes in environment and behavior that most people wouldn't notice until it was too late. The crowd around the main stage had grown significantly since the band started playing. People were standing closer together, moving in tighter patterns, creating the kind of density that would make evacuation difficult if it became necessary. Children were running between groups of adults, making it harder to account for everyone in case of emergency. The noise level had increased to the point where verbal warnings or instructions would be difficult to hear. From a tactical perspective, it was a worst-case scenario developing in real time. But from a community perspective, it was exactly what the festival organizers had hoped for. Maximum attendance, high energy, shared enjoyment of local culture and entertainment. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. At first I assumed it was another emergency alert from the authorities. But when I opened it, the message was something entirely different. The sniper is in position. The festival will not end as planned. I stared at the screen, reading the message again to make sure I had understood it correctly. The sniper is in position, not a drunk making threats. Not someone shooting their mouth off. Someone with specific capabilities, specific intentions, specific preparations. Someone who knew enough about military terminology to use the word sniper instead of shooter or gunman. Someone who was confident enough in their planning to send advance warning. Someone who wanted the psychological impact of fear and anticipation before they acted. I looked around the festival grounds with fresh eyes, now knowing that somewhere in the elevated positions I had been noting all afternoon, someone with a rifle was preparing to turn this celebration into a tragedy. The water tower, the cellular phone tower, the tall buildings around the downtown area. Any one of them could provide the kind of vantage point and shooting position that would allow a skilled marksman to cause massive casualties among the densely packed crowd. But which and how much time did we have before they started shooting? I stood up again, this time with purpose that went far beyond casual concern. This wasn't about hypervigilance or tactical paranoia anymore. This was about confirmed hostile intent and the need for immediate action. I need to call the police, I said, holding up my phone so my family could see the message. Brooke glanced at the screen and rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, Zoe. That's obviously a prank. Probably some teenager trying to scare people because they think it's funny. You can't seriously be falling for something that obvious. But my parents looked more concerned. My mother reached for the phone to read the message more carefully. My father started to say something about reporting it to the authorities. It doesn't matter if it's a prank, I said, already dialing the emergency number from the previous alerts. Threats like this have to be taken seriously. Threats like what? Brooke asked. Some kid with too much time on his hands sending random text messages. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Zoe. You're so conditioned to see danger everywhere that you can't recognize an obvious joke when you see one. The call went through this time, connecting me to an emergency dispatcher who sounded stressed and overwhelmed. In the background I could hear radio chatter, multiple conversations, and the general chaos that accompanies major incident response. Emergency services, what's your location and the nature of your emergency? I'm at the Cedar Rapids Summer Festival. I just received a text message about a sniper being in position. The message says the festival will not end as planned. Can you read me the exact text and tell me what number it came from? I provided the information, spelling out each word carefully, while the dispatcher entered it into her system. Around me, my family watched with expressions ranging from concern to skepticism. Ma'am, we're going to need you to forward that message to a specific number I'm going to give you. We're currently investigating several threats related to today's festival, and this information could be important to our response. Several threats. That confirmed what I had been suspecting. This wasn't an isolated incident or a random prank. This was part of a coordinated pattern of behavior that law enforcement was already tracking. I forwarded the message as instructed and provided my contact information in case they needed to reach me for follow-up questions. When I ended the call, Brooke was looking at me with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. You actually called the police, she said. You actually reported an obvious prank text as a serious threat. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound right now? Better to be ridiculous than dead, I said, the words coming out sharper than I had intended. Dead? She repeated. You think someone is actually going to start shooting at a family festival in Cedar Rapids, Iowa? You think there's actually a sniper positioned somewhere around here planning to kill people? I think that when someone sends a message about snipers and festivals not ending as planned, the smart response is to take it seriously until proven otherwise. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her making a decision about how to respond. When she spoke, her voice carried a tone of forced patience that I had learned to recognize as her way of dealing with what she considered my post-deployment irrationality. Zoe, I understand that your experiences in Afghanistan were intense. I understand that you learned to be suspicious and cautious and ready for violence, but you're not there anymore. You're home, in Iowa, at a community festival, surrounded by families and children and people who wouldn't hurt a fly. She gestured toward the crowd around us, pointing out the scenes of innocent celebration that surrounded us on all sides. Look around you. Really look. Do you see anything that looks like a threat? Do you see anyone acting suspiciously? Do you see anything that suggests we're in danger? I did look around. I saw families enjoying carnival games and local food. I saw teenagers flirting and taking selfies. I saw elderly couples dancing to the band's music. I saw children chasing bubbles and laughing with the pure joy that comes from summer afternoons and community celebrations. But I also saw things that Brooke couldn't see, wouldn't see, refused to acknowledge as significant. I saw the tactical advantages of the elevated positions around the festival grounds. I saw the lack of adequate cover in the open field areas where most people were gathered. I saw the bottleneck effect at the main entrance that would slow evacuation if it became necessary. Most importantly, I saw the complete lack of awareness among the thousands of people around us, the assumption of safety that made them vulnerable, the trust in their community that made them unprepared for the possibility that someone might want to hurt them. I see people who think they're safe, I said quietly, and I hope they're right, but even as I said it, even as I tried to let myself believe that Brooke's assessment of the situation was correct, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that we were running out of time, that somewhere in the elevated positions around us, someone with hostile intentions and the skills to act on them was making final preparations. The message on my phone had been specific about timing. The festival will not end as planned. That suggested the attack would come during a significant moment, when maximum impact could be achieved. The afternoon band performance was scheduled to end at 3:00 p.m., followed by a brief break before the evening activities began. It was now 8 minutes until the scheduled end of the performance, 8 minutes until whatever was planned would begin. I looked at Brooke, sitting on the blanket with her phone in her hand, completely confident in her assessment that we were safe, completely certain that my concerns were the product of military paranoia rather than legitimate tactical awareness. In less than 10 minutes, everything she believed about safety and security and the predictable nature of life in Cedar Rapids was about to be shattered. And when that happened, all the training she had dismissed as unnecessary, all the skills she had characterized as irrelevant, all the experience she had trivialized as an extended vacation, would become the only thing standing between her and a bullet. But she didn't know that yet, and I prayed that somehow, despite all the evidence pointing toward imminent danger, she would never have to find out. The first shot shattered the afternoon at exactly 2:47 p.m., just as the band was finishing their final song. The sound cut through the applause and laughter like a blade, sharp and unmistakable to anyone who had heard gunfire before, but to most of the families scattered across Riverside Park, it probably sounded like a firecracker or a car backfiring. I knew better. My body reacted before my mind had fully processed what was happening. 15 months in Afghanistan had trained me to distinguish between harmless noises and the specific crack of a high-powered rifle. This was the latter, fired from an elevated position somewhere northwest of our location, probably from the water tower I had been monitoring throughout the afternoon. The crowd around the main stage continued clapping for several seconds, unaware that their world had just changed forever. The band members were packing up their equipment, smiling and waving at the audience. Children were still running between groups of adults, their laughter mixing with the general buzz of conversation and activity. Then came the second shot. This time someone screamed. A woman near the front of the stage stumbled and fell, clutching her shoulder. Blood spread across her yellow sundress as her husband knelt beside her, shouting for help in a voice filled with confusion and terror. Now the crowd understood. The applause stopped instantly, replaced by shouts of fear and panic. People began running in all directions, some toward the exits, others toward whatever cover they could find, many simply running without any clear destination in mind. I dropped to the ground and pulled Brooke down with me, my hand gripping her wrist so tightly that she cried out in pain and surprise. "What are you doing?" she demanded, trying to pull away from me. "Zoe, you're hurting me." "Stay down," I said, my voice carrying the authority that came from countless hours of training and experience. "Someone is shooting from an elevated position. We need to get to cover." "Shooting?" She looked around wildly, finally beginning to comprehend what was happening. "You mean someone is actually shooting at people? This is really happening." A third shot rang out, and this time I could see the impact. A man running toward the parking area suddenly pitched forward, his leg buckling beneath him. He crawled behind a concrete barrier near the entrance, leaving a trail of blood on the asphalt. The water tower, I said, more to myself than to anyone else. I had been right about the shooting position. The elevation, the angle of fire, the clear sightlines to the main festival areas, all confirmed what I had suspected. He's firing from the water tower. My parents had dropped to the ground as well, my mother clutching my father's arm with white knuckles. They looked stunned, paralyzed by the sudden transformation of their peaceful community gathering into a scene of violence and chaos. But Brooke was still struggling against my grip, still trying to stand up, still not fully grasping the reality of what was happening around us. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "We need to run, we need to get to the car and leave."
No, I said firmly. Running across open ground is exactly what he wants. Look around you. Anyone who tries to cross those open areas becomes a target. She followed my gaze toward the main festival grounds, where people were indeed becoming targets. The shooter was methodical, patient, picking off individuals who were running across the exposed grass areas or trying to reach their vehicles in the parking lot. Each shot was precise, calculated, designed to cause maximum fear and confusion. "Then what do we do?" my father asked, his voice shaking. "How do we get out of here?" I was already scanning the immediate area, looking for cover that would provide protection from the water tower position while offering potential routes to safety. The picnic tables scattered throughout the park were too flimsy to stop rifle rounds. The vendor booths offered concealment but not cover. The main stage area had some solid structure, but it was too far away and would require crossing open ground to reach. "There," I said, pointing toward a cluster of concrete barriers that had been installed around the park's maintenance building. "Those barriers will stop rifle rounds. We can move from here to there if we stay low and use the crowd for concealment." "Use the crowd?" Brooke stared at me in horror. "You want us to hide behind other people?" "I want us to move when everyone else is moving so we don't stand out as individual targets," I explained. "Single people running alone draw attention. Groups moving together blend into the chaos." Another shot, another scream. Someone near the food vendors had been hit, and the people around them were scattering like startled birds. But I noticed something about the shooter's pattern. He was targeting people who were running in straight lines across open areas, people who were moving predictably, presenting clear shots. "When I say go, we move together toward those barriers," I told my family. "Stay low, move in a zigzag pattern, don't run in straight lines. If someone falls, don't stop to help them. Keep moving until we reach cover. Don't stop to help." My mother looked appalled. "Zoe, we can't just leave people who are hurt. If we stop to help, we become targets ourselves," I said, "and then we can't help anyone." It was harsh, but it was true. In combat situations, the first priority was always reaching safety. You couldn't help wounded people if you became wounded yourself. You couldn't save others if you didn't survive. But these weren't combat veterans I was talking to. These were civilians who had never been in a life-or-death situation before. For them, the idea of not stopping to help an injured person went against every instinct of human decency and compassion. "Zoe's right," my father said quietly. "We need to get to safety first." I could see that the shooter was reloading or repositioning. There had been a pause in the gunfire, and some people were using the opportunity to move toward better cover. This was our chance. "Go," I said. We moved as a group, staying low, zigzagging across the grass toward the concrete barrier. My parents moved awkwardly, unused to this kind of tactical movement, but they followed my instructions and kept pace. Brooke stumbled once but recovered quickly, her designer sandals not exactly ideal for emergency maneuvers. We reached the barriers just as the shooting resumed. From this position, we had solid cover from the water tower, and I could see several other families who had made it to similar protected positions around the park. But the situation was far from over. The shooter had good fields of fire from his elevated position, and there were still hundreds of people trapped in the open areas of the festival grounds. Some were hiding behind inadequate cover, others were trying to help wounded friends and family members, and many were simply paralyzed by fear and confusion. "What now?" Brooke asked. She was shaking, her face pale, her carefully styled hair now disheveled and streaked with dirt. "How long do we stay here? When do the police come?" As if in answer to her question, the sound of sirens began to echo across the park. But I knew from experience that police response to active shooter situations took time. The officers would need to assess the situation, establish perimeters, identify the shooter's position,
and formulate a tactical response. That could take 30 minutes or more. Meanwhile, people were dying. I looked toward the water tower, trying to estimate the distance and angle. It was approximately 600 yards from our position, well within the range of most hunting rifles. The shooter had chosen his position well, elevated enough to provide commanding views of the entire festival area, but not so high that wind and distance would significantly affect accuracy. "Zoe," my father said, following my gaze. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that someone needs to stop this," I said, "and the police aren't here yet." "Stop this how?" Brooke demanded. "You don't have a weapon, you can't just charge across the park and climb the water tower. That's suicide." She was right, of course. I didn't have a weapon, and any direct assault on the shooter's position would be exactly the kind of predictable action that would get me killed. But there were other options, other ways to disrupt his operation and save lives. "I need to get closer," I said. "Close enough to either distract him or find a way to neutralize the threat." "Closer?" My mother grabbed my arm. "Absolutely not. You're not leaving us here to go play hero. It's too dangerous." Play hero. Even now, even in the middle of an active shooting situation, the language they used diminished what I was proposing to do. As if my military training, my experience, my skills were somehow just pretend rather than real capabilities that could make a difference. "Mom, this is what I'm trained for," I said gently. "This is exactly the kind of situation where my experience matters, where the things I learned in Afghanistan can actually help people." "Your experience was in Afghanistan," Brooke said. "This is Cedar Rapids. It's completely different." "A rifle is a rifle," I replied. "A shooter is a shooter. The tactics are the same whether you're in Kandahar province or Iowa." Another volley of shots rang out, and I could see more people falling, more families diving for cover, more chaos spreading throughout the festival ground. Every minute we waited was another minute for the shooter to cause more casualties. I made my decision. I'm going to circle around through the downtown area and approach the water tower from the north side, I told them. "That's his blind spot. He can't see that approach angle from his position." "You don't know that," my father protested. "You're guessing." "I'm not guessing," I said. "I've been studying that water tower all afternoon. I know exactly what he can and can't see from up there." It was true. All that hypervigilance that Brooke had been criticizing, all that tactical awareness she had dismissed as paranoia, had given me a complete mental map of the area's sightlines and firing positions. "Zoe, please," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't go, stay here with us. Wait for the police." I looked at her, then at my father, then at Brooke. They were terrified, confused, desperate for this nightmare to end. But they were also safe, at least for the moment, behind cover that would protect them from rifle fire. The same couldn't be said for the hundreds of other people still trapped in the open areas of the park. "I'll be back," I said, starting to move away from the barriers. "Zoe, wait." Brooke grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I'm sorry about everything I said about your deployment, about your training, about you being paranoid. You were right. You were right about everything." I squeezed her hand briefly. "I know," I said. "And that's exactly why I have to go." I moved away from our cover position, staying low and using the scattered debris and abandoned festival equipment for concealment. The route I had planned would take me through the downtown area, behind the buildings that blocked the shooter's view, and then up to the base of the water tower. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were too many variables, too many things that could go wrong, but it was better than waiting for more people to die while law enforcement organized their response. The streets of downtown Cedar Rapids were eerily quiet. Most people had either fled the area or taken shelter indoors when the shooting started. I could hear sirens approaching from multiple directions, but I could also hear continued gunfire from the direction of the festival ground. I reached the base of the water tower and looked up at the metal ladder that led to the elevated platform where the shooter had positioned himself. It was approximately 80 feet to the top, and climbing it would leave me completely exposed for several minutes. But as I studied the structure, I realized I didn't need to climb all the way to the top. About 60 feet up, there was a maintenance platform that would put me within throwing distance of the shooter's position, and in my pocket I had something that might be useful. The grenade I had kept as a souvenir from Afghanistan wasn't live, of course. It was an inert training device that we had used for practice exercises. But from a distance, in low light conditions, It would look exactly like the real thing. I started climbing. The metal rungs were hot from the afternoon sun, and my hands began to sweat as I pulled myself higher. Below me, the sounds of the ongoing crisis continued. Gunshots, sirens, shouting voices. Above me, I could hear movement on the shooter's platform. When I reached the maintenance platform, I was approximately 20 feet below, and 30 feet horizontal from the shooter's position. Close enough to see him clearly, close enough to throw accurately, close enough to make this work. He was exactly what I had expected. A young man, probably early 20s, wearing camouflage clothing and carrying what looked like a hunting rifle with a scope. He was methodical in his targeting, taking time between shots to select victims and aim carefully. I pulled the inert grenade from my pocket and prepared to throw it. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. The shooter spun toward me, rifle swinging in my direction. For a split second, we stared at each other across the space between platforms. He was surprised, confused by my presence, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected development. That moment of confusion was all I needed. I threw the grenade in a high arc that would land it on his platform, then immediately dropped flat against the maintenance platform to avoid the rifle shot that I knew was coming. The bullet struck the metal railing where my head had been a fraction of a second earlier, sending sparks flying and leaving a deep gouge in the steel. But the grenade had landed exactly where I had aimed it, rolling to a stop just a few feet from the shooter's position. He stared at it in horror, recognizing the distinctive shape, even if he couldn't tell from a distance that it was inert. 5 seconds. I shouted, continuing the deception. He dropped his rifle and ran, not toward the ladder, which would have brought him past my position, but toward the opposite side of the platform. I heard his boots clanging against the metal grating, heard him cursing and shouting, heard the sound of someone in complete panic, and then I heard nothing. The grenade, of course, didn't explode. It just sat there on the platform, a harmless piece of metal and plastic. But the shooter didn't know that, and in his desperation to escape what he thought was imminent death, he had made a fatal mistake. I climbed the remaining 20 feet to his platform, and found his rifle abandoned where he had dropped it. Through the scope I could see the festival grounds below, could see the people who were still taking cover, could see the emergency vehicles that were beginning to arrive. But I could also see something else. The shooter's body, lying motionless on the ground 80 feet below the water tower. In his panic to escape the grenade, he had tried to climb down too quickly and had fallen. The shooting was over. I saved the rifle and began my own climb down, moving carefully and deliberately. By the time I reached the ground, police officers were surrounding the area. They approached me with weapons drawn, shouting commands that I followed precisely. "I'm Army," I called out, keeping my hands visible. I disarmed the shooter. "The rifle is on the platform above." It took several minutes to sort out the situation, to explain what had happened, to convince the officers that I was not a threat, but eventually they understood. The shooter was dead, the weapon was secured, and the immediate danger was over. I walked back toward the festival grounds, escorted by police officers who were taking my statement and documenting the scene. The park looked like a war zone. Abandoned picnic blankets, overturned tables, scattered personal belongings. Emergency medical personnel were treating wounded civilians while crime scene investigators began their work. I found my family still behind the concrete barriers where I had left them. When they saw me approaching, Brooke ran toward me with tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she said, throwing her arms around me. "You actually did it. You stopped him. Is everyone okay?" I asked, looking at my parents. They nodded, still shaken but unharmed. Around us, the controlled chaos of emergency response continued. Paramedics, police officers, FBI agents who had arrived to take over the investigation. "Zoe," my father said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You're safe. That's what matters." But Brooke shook her head. "No, he's right. We owe you everything. Your training, your experience, your instincts, everything we dismissed and criticized and made fun of. It saved our lives today." She paused, looking around at the scene of devastation that could have been so much worse. "Your deployment wasn't a vacation," she continued. "It was preparation for this, for today, for the moment when everything we thought we knew about safety and security turned out to be wrong." I hugged her tightly, feeling the tension and fear of the afternoon finally beginning to fade. The crisis was over, the threat was neutralized, my family was safe, but more than that,
something fundamental had changed between us. The gap that had existed since my return from Afghanistan, the disconnect between their world and mine, had been bridged by shared experience and mutual understanding. They finally understood what I had been trying to tell them all along, that the skills I had learned, the training I had received, the experiences I had gained were not irrelevant relics from a distant war. They were tools that could make a difference anywhere, anytime, when evil people decided to hurt innocent ones. As we walked away from Riverside Park that evening, past the emergency vehicles and crime scene tape, past the reporters and investigators, I realized that my homecoming was finally complete, not because I had proven something to my family, but because they had finally seen me for who I really was, a soldier, a protector, a person who had chosen to serve something bigger than herself. And when the moment came to put that service to the test, I had been ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.